Mitch Lawrence, SiriusXM NBA Radio, Sporting News, Forbes, longtime NBA columnist, and a guest of the Sports Bash now on the Boardwalk on the Hotline. Mike Gill, Jeff Mosher on a Thursday edition of the Sports Bash, where we now know all the NBA matchups, including Philadelphia, Mitch taking on Brooklyn. And we'll start there, obviously. Do you like Philly's matchup there for a team that's played together about 10 times all year?
Here come all the excuses, huh? Is that the way we're going to handle it down in Philly? I thought you guys were supposed to be big and bad this year. What happened?
That's Brooklyn said. Bring on Philly.
The biggest problem is the big man. If Joel Embiid can't make an impact in this series, this is going to be a tough series. He should go out there. If he's healthy, he should destroy the Nets. They're small. They don't have anybody in the middle. He should basically treat them like he treats Andre Drummond, right?
Yeah.
But the big question is, what's going on with his knee?
I think everybody wants to know. And yesterday was interesting. I mean, you heard Elton Brand's comments, and he said, well, he'll probably be ready, but there's a possibility that he misses the game. Now, I mean, this is just a random wear and tear with tendinitis. You just don't know what it's going to be like day to day, it seems like.
Well, that's the big thing, because if he's not right, they're not going anywhere. I mean, they might beat Brooklyn, but where are they going without Embiid long term in terms of, can they make a deep run in the playoffs? Absolutely. I don't think they can unless he's right. That's the big thing. That's why if you're Brett Brown, what's he talking about, being scared? He should be scared of that. Be scared of the fact that Joel Embiid may not be, 80%? We'll see. I mean, that's the big thing, because Brooklyn's going to be a pain in the neck for him. Brooklyn starts making threes. They've played together. They got house money. There's no pressure on them at all. There's all the pressure in the world on Philly and Brett Brown. Brett Brown has to make a deep playoff run now. Mitigating circumstances, Joel Embiid's walking around on one leg, can't get up and down the court. That's one thing. But we all know, out of all their, 16 teams in the playoffs, 16 coaches, the name that keeps coming up of the guy who's on the firing line, who's got to get his team deep into the playoffs, is Brett Brown.
Now, let me ask you, whether that's fair or unfair, how many teams, just off the top of your head, do you recollect have added two players at different times and made deep playoff runs?
Can't think of one off the top of my head.
Right?
You've had substantial additions in the offseason leading into the season,
yes.
Most notably the Celtics, when they added Garnett and they added Ray Allen to Paul Pierce. And they went out and they won, 66 or 67 games with Doc Rivers. Remember what happened in the first round of that year against Atlanta? Atlanta was a terrible team. They won 38 or 39 games. There was a 29-win discrepancy and took them to Game 7. Took them to a Game 7. Go back and look at that Celtic playoff run. That was a life-and-death titanic struggle to get the title with adding Garnett and Ray Allen throughout the course of an entire season.
Yeah, we were actually talking before, Mitch, about when LeBron teamed up with Bosh and then went down to South Beach with Dwayne. It wasn't great from the beginning. They struggled in the first month, and then they obviously lost in the finals. And it wasn't until kind of that second year where Dwayne told LeBron, "Hey, be the guy," that it happened.
You had Detroit. When Detroit went to the finals, I guess it was in 2004. They added Rasheed late. Remember that? They added Rasheed Wallace late. He bounced. He went from Portland to Atlanta. He played, and then he went up to Detroit. But I think everybody else was pretty much in place, if I'm correct. I'm talking about the Rip Hamiltons, Chauncey Billups, Tayshaun Prince. Those guys were there, but he was a key part of that team, as it turned out. But no, this is a very unique situation for Philly, and whether it's fair or not, we talk about what's fair or not. Let's step back. Who hired Brett Brown? Yes, it was the same owners, but it was a different GM, right?
Mm-hmm. We were having this conversation earlier, Mitch, that this is a weird spot because Brown was essentially the VP of basketball operation. He hired Brand. Right? I mean, how does Brand come in and say, thanks for hiring me, you're fired?
But the call's going to come from up top, because from everybody I talk to, this is a hands-on, heavy-handed ownership group. And they made the move last year, pulled the rug out from under Brett Brown when they sent Bridges out to Phoenix to get the big number one pick with Zaire Smith, because they thought they could get Kawhi Leonard with that. Remember that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that was all ownership-driven. Brett Brown, who was ostensibly in charge of things, this is pre-Elton Brand, I think,
Yes.
He was like livid that they actually did this to him. But that's where you learned that the Philly ownership group, and I don't know how much it's changed under Elton Brand, but let's just put it this way: ownership is going to make the call on Brett Brown. It's not going to be an Elton Brand decision.
By the way, Brett Brown said this about the Nets, quote, "We don't match up well, dangerous, completely dangerous. Where do I assess where we're weak? Where do I need the most help? It's pick and roll defense. The matchup scares you." Does that sound like a team that is confident?
No.
Rolling in.
But it's a new, it's basically a kind of a new playoff team. And you know what? I could see from Brett, now maybe he's talking too much, but listen, the thing that scares you about Brooklyn won, 42 games?
Yes.
Okay? I mean, one thing, guys, people want to talk about the East is back and all. There are three teams, the last three teams that made the playoffs in the East are not good teams. They're average teams to okay teams, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you just look at their records. And by the way, compare that to the West where the Clippers are 8th seed, I think they got 48 wins.
Right.
Okay? Sacramento would have been fighting till the bitter end in the Eastern Conference, and they fired their coach today, by the way, with 39 wins. So now I could see Brett's point because Brooklyn had that crazy 17-day road trip where they won. They basically won a miracle game in Sacramento, and then they had one other win, I guess, against the Lakers. Lost in Portland the night that Jokic went down to his injury, and they came off that trip. That trip ended in Philly, remember? And then since then, they've done a nice job. They've had they beat the Bucks without Giannis. That's a big asterisk. But they also won in Indiana. Mm-hmm. They've been playing pretty well, and they've got their roles defined. They've played together. D'Angelo Russell could be the most improved player. You know what you're going to get from Dinwiddie at points. I remember one of the games against Philly this year where Jimmy Butler had to win it with a last-second shot.
Yeah.
So they present a lot of problems. I mean, they start hitting threes, and they're going to be, as they say, loosey-goosey because nobody's expecting. They weren't expecting the playoffs this year. They were hoping. They were hoping they could get something out of this team. But let me tell you, this is a great spot for the Nets because there are no expectations. All the pressure, all the expectations are on your team, on the Sixers, as it should be.
And I'm not sure, Mitch, there's a team in the NBA that maybe has more pressure on them than Philly.
Well, how about Golden State?
I mean,
they're going for a three-peat. I mean, it's tight. I mean, they played these last 82 preseason games because, you saw how they were acting down the stretch with the officials. They collected 60 technicals and 6 ejections. That was heading into. I lost track after that. It was heading into the last 4 or 5 games. They have their expectations are championship or bust. If they don't win the title, okay, that's a bad season for the Warriors because they are lined up for a three-peat, and then Kevin Durant can come up here and play to his heart's content for the Knicks.
Yeah. To Mike's point, though, I think that if they don't win the title, as disappointing and as much pressure there is,
it's a bad year.
Right, but nobody gets fired, right?
Year.
I don't think Steve Kerr gets fired. Whereas if you look at the Sixers, right, but that's why with the pressure, maybe fighting for your job or your future, you mentioned you hear that Brett Brown is on the hot seat here.
Where the expectations are so.
And by the way, Brett Brown has been on thin ice for now more than 1 year. Yeah, you heard his name last year, that this could be a situation. They lose to Miami, he could have been ousted. It seems like he's now on borrowed time. Unfair or not, that's the way it seems.
It just seems that of all the teams that are, title, quote-unquote, possibility, top 3 seeds in each conference, they have high expectations, yet the least stable roster to try to maneuver. I mean, Boston has been together for 2 years almost with this group of guys. Toronto's been together for most of this season. They added Gasol. Milwaukee's been together for most, all the way going back to training camp. Sixers have been together since what, February, if that?
Yeah. They've got it's definitely not a great situation. It's not the optimal situation. The optimal situation is what Steve Kerr has: 2 MVP players, a team that's won 2 in a row, that knows how to win, that offensively has figured out. Offensively, this is a team that is a juggernaut compared to everybody else in the NBA, where it's all about offense in this day and age. Every other team, starting with your team and on down, you look at it and you go, yeah, they're probably. Giannis hasn't been out of the first round yet.
Nope.
Right, and they've got a significant injury in Brogdon, and they've got, we'll see about Mirotic. Toronto, the clock is running on Kawhi Leonard. Looks like he's going to the Clippers. Will he? How are they going to react to that? We don't know what Nick Nurse is going to be as a head coach in the playoffs. Boston, Marcus Smart, out 2 rounds. That is a huge blow. I mean, I don't know if Indiana can beat them, but they got a much better chance when Marcus Smart isn't around to take out their best scorers. You go from there. And then out in West, the 2 seed is a Denver team. That's a nice team. They won, 54 games? They have no playoff experience. You see what Mike Malone said? He's being matched up against Greg Popovich. He said, Greg Popovich has 5 championship rings. I've got 1 wedding ring. Okay? And their difference, he's playing, this is Mike Malone. He's got 54 wins. That's only a 6-win difference over San Antonio. By the way, neither team can win on the road. So, everybody, Golden State, put Golden State aside, then you've got all these other so-called contenders that all have some serious issues within their own teams, and we'll see how everybody reacts.
Let me ask you something on Brett Brown. Because we were talking about this earlier. Do you think if he's under the gun, all performance related, or is it that maybe ownership has someone in mind who they think can do something different with the personnel that they have there? Kind of like when Mark Jackson got fired, Steve Kerr comes in and just elevates the Warriors to what they are now. Do you think that they feel that Brett, with always having him be at the top of the key or the way he does his rotations, do you think maybe they feel that there's somebody else who would use the personnel differently and more advantageously?
It's a great question. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I do know in the past I had heard that they were looking at guys like a Doc Rivers, in case Doc Rivers wasn't for long with the Clippers. Mm-hmm. That's already a couple of years old, or at least a year old. Mm. Obvious. I think what they
Jay Wright's name ever come up?
I'm sorry?
Jay Wright's name ever come up?
No, never heard Jay Wright. I did hear, Doc. And here's the thing about Doc Rivers. Doc Rivers is a guy, and this year might have been his best year in terms of what he did for the Clippers. But
no doubt.
A lot of people like Doc Rivers because he's, great as the face of your franchise in terms of dealing with the media. He's won a ring. He got to 2 finals with Boston. He can coach superstars and stars. So when I heard his name linked to Philadelphia, I figured, that kind of makes sense. That's a kind of a typical thing that you'd hear. Now he's out of play, obviously, because it looks like the Clippers have locked him up for the future. But I have not heard, you hear that the thing you hear about Brett Brown is, he's got to go deep in the playoffs, and there are big expectations. You don't hear any names about somebody waiting in the wings. I have not heard one name in terms of that. Certainly not Jay Wright. Mm-hmm. I don't know how Jay Wright is viewed by ownership. This is going to be a Josh Harris and his guys' decision if it comes to that. I think a lot of people around the league, obviously they hope that Brett Brown has success, but this is a thing this is the big issue for Philadelphia in these playoffs. And, depending, we got to see, the interesting thing is going to be if Embiid takes the floor, when he takes the floor, whether it's game 1 or game 2, what kind of impact he makes. Because if he is dragging a leg around and they lose in a, first, second round, how does that impact their decision on Brett Brown? Because then you're looking at, well, he's obviously your best all-NBA type player, MVP, caliber player. If he's not playing up to snuff, what can Brett Brown do about that? Now, I know in this series he's got more talent anyway. He's got Jimmy Butler and he's got Ben Simmons, even though he can't shoot, doesn't want to shoot, and he's got Tobias Harris. They got it over the Nets. The big question is, though, putting it together on the court.
By the way, 3 coaches fired today. Larry Drew is done in Cleveland. J.B. Bickerstaff is out in Memphis. And Dave Yeager is out in Sacramento. There is some reports that Monty Williams on Brett Brown's bench could be an eye in Sacramento. He's lost a lot of assistants the last couple of years. But, so we'll have to keep an eye on fired coaches. And maybe that answers Jeff's question. Are one of those guys somebody that the Sixers have liked in the past?
It's when you look at the job that Yeager did this year in Sacramento, they were until the last, I think it was game 76, where they finally got eliminated officially in the Western Conference. And the job he's done with the Aaron Fox and Marvin Bagley, and he's very, very good coach. He's very good with the young guys. It's a shame. I mean, the thing that Monty Williams has to know about Sacramento, everybody knows it, is that they're a dysfunctional outfit.
Yep.
There's several teams, the Knicks, Phoenix, Minnesota, Sacramento. These are the jobs where, Yeah, there are only 30 jobs in the NBA, but there are 4 franchises I just named off, and I'll tell you what, I'll put the Lakers in that group too.
They're definitely in
that.
there.
Oh my gosh,
You have to be very careful. If you are a coach and an outsider, you might only get a 2 or 3 year window because the people above you just don't know what they're doing. It comes down to that.
We're talking with Mitch Lawrence, SiriusXM NBA Radio, Forbes, Sporting News, longtime NBA columnist. What about Boston, Indiana? Boston, no Smart. You stressed how important that is, but is Boston on upset alert, or is this Indiana team just a nice regular season team, played hard all season long, but an easy out in the playoff?
They were a little bit better, I think. They played about 40, 45 games without Oladipo, and I think they were about a 500 team. So they know how to play without Oladipo. The problem is if you break down their record, they were awful against, I think, the top, playoff teams or top teams in the East, and they beat losing teams. So credit to them for that. But when you're missing Victor Oladipo now in the playoffs, that's a problem. I will say this. A lot of those guys on that team took LeBron to a Game 7 last year. They're not going to be in awe of the Boston Celtics, especially when the Celtics are missing a guy who's there. I mean, you know what Marcus Smart is. He plays with an edge. He gives them their fire and their passion. He's a tremendous on-the-ball defender. That's going to be a big, big help for Indiana. But having said that, Boston still has more talent. They still have Kyrie. But that's going to be a war. That should be a war. That's not going to be. It can't be easy for Boston because even though they tend to play better when there's an injury or two, so that Brett Stevens doesn't have to figure out guys' roles, or guys are more, Terry Rozier will have a bigger role now, obviously, and that's going to be good for him. He won't be hanging his head about I'm not getting minutes and, Tatum and Brown and all that. Hey, Indiana is still going to cause some problems. Boston should win that series, but without Marcus Smart, especially in the second round, they go up against, who would they play in the second round? They play Milwaukee in the second round without Marcus Smart. Not winning that series. How are they going to win that series without Marcus Smart?
Yeah, you got Philly, Toronto, and Boston, Milwaukee set up for round 2. And they have been the 4 teams that everyone has talked about, essentially since Milwaukee got off to that hot start. Because at the beginning of the year, we didn't know what Milwaukee was going to be a 60-win team. But once they established it, it's been these 4 since the beginning. So of the 4, who any of them have in trouble of stubbing their toe and not making it? Probably not.
Yeah, well, now it comes down to the teams that are set up best, I think, are Milwaukee, even though they're missing, Brogdon, and I think Mirotic will be back soon, because they have a guy who's going to be probably the MVP. And they've got a playoff-tested coach. No, he hasn't coached this team in the playoffs, but Mike Budenholzer's been around. He was with Atlanta a few years ago. They won the 60 games. They went to the conference finals. He's a very good coach. He could be coach of the year. And Toronto's got Kawhi. There'll be no load management in the playoffs. Jeff Van Gundy, we had Jeff Van Gundy on Sirius the other day, and he was telling me that there's going to be load management in the future in the playoffs, and I just can't take that. I mean, it's like, are you kidding me? Guys are going to be saying he's convinced
that's something Jeff brought up to me earlier. He said, what if the Sixers are up 3-0? Do you sit Embiid for that, that 4th game? That's
exact. You know what? To me, you can't, because here's the deal. You sweep out that team, you'll probably get a week rest.
Right.
But here, the interesting thing, obviously, about Toronto is they are, you've seen them play. I mean, they're a really good team. I don't think they can beat Golden State. Can they get out of the East? Yeah, and it's mostly because we've seen what Kawhi can do in the past, and he should be bringing it at full tilt in the playoffs. So I would tend right now, obviously, Embiid's injury, obviously Smart's injury, obviously you mentioned what's going on with Philly, their lack of, they haven't been together. Boston, you lose a significant piece. And the way that Toronto and Milwaukee and their stars, their top players are playing, when they play, I got to favor those 2 teams in terms of an Eastern Conference Finals.
Mitch Lawrence, the NBA playoffs. Any shot that we get an upset on the West side, or do you think it's chalk over there? I like, the Spurs definitely think they have a shot, right?
Oh, no doubt. I mean, what I'm trying to tell you is, Denver doesn't have much playoff experience in terms of I know Millsap's been in the playoffs, but I'm talking about Jamal Murray and Jokic, right? Those guys haven't. And they're a bad road team. Now, the Spurs are a bad road team, too. I mean, look, I think Denver had the best winning percentage at home of anybody. I think they were 34-7. I think they had a losing road record, Denver. So keep that in mind. And they only won 54 games. They're not an elite team. I would classify them as a very good team. But 54 wins is not 58 wins. That's a real good team, right? So if you look at just the standpoint of who finishes. Denver, Portland's got, Portland is a damaged goods team now without Nurkic.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Houston, to me, is still the most dangerous team because of Harden. But let me tell you, I looked over the stats today. Somebody alerted me to this. Look over James Harden's stats, regular season versus playoff season the last 3 years. Here's the trend. Overall shooting percentage goes down from 44 to about 40-41%. Three-point shooting drops even more, from the high 30s, I think, to the low 30s, high 20s, 7-8 points because of usage, right? So they've got a very tough draw right off the bat because Utah is a very good defensive team. So I like Houston as a team that maybe gives Golden State a run. Do they stub their toe in the first round against Utah? They've got the home court. It's possible. Oklahoma City, San Antonio, the Clippers. I don't know. I could see in Oklahoma City beating Portland. I could see that.
Yeah.
I don't know. The Clippers got no shot. It's only a 9-game win difference between them and the Warriors, but we know what the Warriors really are, right? I mean, the Warriors, they're coming on the court here, and they're clearly the best team because it seems like everybody's healthy. I know Steph Curry rolled an ankle or whatever the other night, but I think they're fine. I don't think you're going to see any huge upsets out west, but does Houston get picked off? It's possible in the first round.
Mitch Lawrence, SiriusXM NBA Radio. I'll let you leave with this. Give us your pontification on Magic Johnson's abrupt resignation.
Oh, my God. Well, he did an awful job. You hire an amateur, you get an amateur. And that's what he was. He didn't put in the necessary hours. He wasn't a grinder. He was trying to be Magic Johnson, Mr. Smiling Face Ambassador, doing a job that requires you pedal to the metal 24/7 with no other outside interests. I mean, only LeBron's got probably more outside interests than Magic. The big question now for the Lakers is, who does Jeannie Buss hire? They only usually hire people from within the Laker family. If you look at their history, they're not going to hire Jerry West. He's not leaving the Clippers. He'd be the natural choice. I think she'll put in a call to Kobe Bryant. I wouldn't be surprised at all. I just don't know if Kobe at this point wants to jump in and be a GM. His guy, Rob Pelinka, or the head of basketball operations, his former agent, Rob Pelinka, is obviously the guy who Magic worked with together in assembling a bad team. Magic did an awful job. There's no two ways about it. The best thing he did was get LeBron, and that wasn't a big
They didn't need him to get
LeBron was supposed to go to L.A. anyway.
Right. They didn't need him to get LeBron.
Like Jerry West said shortly after that, and he's got an axe to grind because he wanted to come back to Lakers at some points and they didn't want him. He said, it's not a huge deal because everybody knew that LeBron wanted to be in Los Angeles. He wanted to play for the Lakers. So it was kind of an easy recruitment. But you look at Magic's whole entire resume and all the stuff. Now he can work with Ben Simmons and help Ben Simmons. He wanted to do it so badly. It's just a bad job overall. And the problem is that he gave LeBron a team that you put together a roster that was okay. They were okay at Christmas time, a little bit better than good. They were okay, and then nobody knew LeBron was going to get hurt, and then the rest of the thing was a fiasco because it ended up with LeBron at odds with all the young players who he tried to trade to New Orleans, and it's just a mess. So they got to find a GM to work with LeBron. It should be David Griffin, who's available, who worked with LeBron in Cleveland. They won a title together. He knows what LeBron wants.
Well, now he's working with you.
LeBron leads. And here's the other thing for Jeannie Buss. Don't overthink it. So David Griffin's not a Laker. Big deal. Hire the guy who can work with LeBron as his record shows. End of story.
Then you be out David Griffin.
That's right.
He's Mitch Lawrence, SiriusXM NBA Radio. It's a great listen. And, of course, right here, kind enough to join us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. It is the NBA playoffs, Sixers-Nets. We'll have it for you 2:30 Saturday right here on 97.3. All right, my man. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
See you, Mitch.
Mitch Lawrence is great. Always entertaining.